Hi guys, I had the recent pleasure of speaking with writer and student of economics Jeff Nielson over at bullionbullscanada.com. Jeff contributes occasionally at Lemetropole Cafe, but his main focus is Bullion Bulls Canada, which provides macroeconomic news, metals information, commentary, and mining research. If you've not been to the site, the link is below. I found Jeff's deep understanding of the precious metals market to be both highly informative and tremendously engaging. So without further delay, here's Conversations 3.0, Part 1, with Jeff Nielson.
We have Jeff Nielson on the line over at bullionbullscanada.com. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Nice to be here.
Jeff, you had the pleasure of interviewing Adrian Douglas back in April, hot on the heels of that dramatic March 2010 CFTC hearing. When you were interviewing Adrian, and Jeffrey Christian had just admitted to 100-to-1 paper metals manipulation, essentially.
Precious metals are financial assets, and like currencies and T-bills and T-bonds, they trade in the multiples of 100 times the underlying physical.
How did that impact you, and what was your reaction to that?
You know, the people who have a handle on what that really signifies in terms of markets were blown away. You know, perhaps the average investor, you know, who hears leverage and wild numbers being bandied about on a regular basis may not have appreciated the significance of it quite as much. And then, of course, there was a huge attempt to back away from the remarks and suggest that, you know, perhaps it was somehow taken out of context and that. But, no, it was certainly something that blew me away personally and a lot of other people in this sector.
Yeah, and what it also did is it backed up all of GATA's research over the past 8, 9, 10 years. Everything that they suspected, everything that Bill Murphy has suspected, everything that Adrian Douglas has suspected was really confirmed. Harvey Organ's suspicions were all confirmed right there at the hearing.
But Jeffrey Christian wasn't finished yet. A couple of months after that, he decided to accept a challenge from Bill Murphy of GATA for a debate, which they called the Great Gold Debate. And I guess he decided that he was going to, you know, set the record straight and even a score and all that. And he was even more magnanimous in providing us with data to support what people, you know, at GATA and other sites have been saying all along. So, you know, in many respects, I think the Great Gold Debate provided us with even more concrete evidence of this nature than his CFTC testimony.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, because your perspective in Canada, I think, is probably unique. And so what's your view on what essentially is an economic meltdown, an enormous mortgage mess with tremendous mortgage fraud now revealed, and a collapsing dollar? What's your view as an outsider looking in at our problems?
I feel every bit as much terror because I see you know, two really frightening dynamics. On the one hand, as you point out, there's still the apathetic majority who don't appreciate the severity of events because there's still enough insulation in our you know, social safety net to prevent the pain from seeping in. But the other thing that you have to realize, you know, even with the people who, you know, think we have a fairly reasonable handle on things and try to do a good job of explaining things, you know, to some extent, we're like blind men, you know, feeling around in the dark because things are so totally unprecedented today. And that perhaps is the message that really needs to get out there to wake people up. Is nothing like this has happened before at any time in the modern era, and certainly not to an economy as large as the United States.
Yeah, you're right about that. I think at this point, what people are beginning to absolutely recognize, even those that are asleep, is the fact that the systematic fraud is so widespread, and now it's no longer covert, it's overt. And this latest mortgage fraud revelation that is now in the process of coming to light, it's probably the straw that's going to break the camel's back.
Well, that's certainly how I see it myself. But, you know, what is exasperating, if not infuriating, is how a big chunk of the mainstream media is still going out of their way to portray this as merely clerical errors. And, you know, that's where I think Americans perhaps should be even more alarmed than with the events themselves, is that they're not getting those events communicated to them in anything remotely approaching a fair and an open manner. You know, clearly corporate interests have been allowed to, you know, dominate the need for getting out good information to people. And, you know, in many ways, that's a more frightening aspect to face than even, the particular mess itself.
None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe themselves to be free. And I think that the fascism that you're describing, this marriage between the corporatocracy and the oligarchy, the ruling oligarchy of this country, and the government is now completely so obvious to people. People are waking up. If they could just shatter this false right-left paradigm, we might have a chance. But see, you know what, Jeff? People don't understand fiat currency. If they did, silver would be $100 an ounce tomorrow. Gold would be at $3,000 an ounce tomorrow. But, having said that, would you dare trade this market? I mean, would you dare try to time this market and wait for a pullback? I think only crazy money would get out of silver. I mean, I'm not saying there's not going to be a pullback, but I think you'd have to really check your mental state of health if you thought you could time it and buy back at 21 or 20.
Well, one of the messages that I try to put out on a regular basis is that unlike what you're hearing from the vast majority of financial advisors, we don't think buy and hold is dead. We think for people, if they come to the precious metal sector, they'll see that buy and hold is very much alive. And that applies to both bullion and to the mining companies. And, so in that respect, I agree with you 100%. There's no need to be a trader in this market because the fundamentals are lined up. And, of course, in many respects, the bankers who have been suppressing this market have been doing us a service. The fact that they're continually pumping out this negative propaganda prevents the market from getting overheated. The fact that you have all of these we buy gold vultures trying to get people to rid themselves of their useless gold and silver is ensuring that there's no large hordes of scrap that are suddenly going to be dumped onto the market as the price rises. And, so basically, I agree to that the stars are all lined up in terms of this simply, continuing to progress smoothly, and certainly over the very short term, because this is generally a very strong time. There will certainly be corrections. And, for people who have already gotten part of the holdings they want in this sector, you can afford to be more choosy and, sit tight, and wait for some, sudden shock. Generally that occurs after a particularly strong spike. So there will be opportunities that are somewhat better for buying. But, for the people that don't want to play that game and try to outthink the market, you don't have to. You can get into your dollar cost averaging with buying your bullion.
Right.
Or with buying even the mining shares.
Right. I think I'd speak on behalf of everyone when I say we all agree with you that the manipulators have done us a great service in their manipulation by keeping these prices artificially low, allowing for folks to dollar cost average over time. I just see that ending. Don't you see that coming to a quick end, this manipulation, this paper manipulation, because it no longer works? It's like the wizard behind the curtain has been revealed.
Well, that's a very common inquiry from readers, and I basically respond to it always in the same manner. Because the manipulation exists, we're never able to fully see what's taking place in the market. We don't know quite how close the bankers are to total capitulation. Mm-hmm. And in that respect, they have one element of control. They can't stop the fact that they're losing the war. That war is already lost. Bullion is going to continue marching higher. But, what they can decide is how much longer they want to continue to fight. And, if they're basically willing to make one last stand, over the next few months, maybe they could cause some real havoc in the market for a period of a few weeks. On the other hand, if they're bound and determined to remain some sort of a force for several more years, then the only way they can do that is to give ground much more readily. So, it's one of those things where we simply don't have quite enough data to be able to extrapolate and draw any firm conclusions on this, because ultimately that's the one element of control that the bankers retain.
Well, I really admire your measured approach, because these are definitely heady times. What is the atmosphere like in Canada? Are people waking up?
No, there's no doubt that Canadians are even more insulated than Americans, because with our economy being relatively stronger, we're able to insulate people from the pain even further. So there's much less awareness in Canada than there is in the U.S. And in fact, we see that to a large extent with the traffic that comes to our site. The U.S. traffic, by and large, are much more interested in bullion itself and the economics that we talk about. conversely, with our Canadian audience, they're much more interested in the mining companies, kind of typical Canadian investors, because we have a long history with being heavily involved in these companies up here. So on that basis alone, we can tell that that it tends to be a greater raising of awareness in the U.S. than in Canada, both in terms of absolute numbers and even proportions.
And this concludes Part 1 of Conversations 3.0 with Jeff Nielson. And stay tuned for Part 2 of my interview with Jeff, in which we discuss the bond bubble and Jeff's startling prediction of potential future revelations of bond fraud. My hearty thanks to Jeff for his generous time, and I invite all of you to check out bullionbullscanada.com. The link is below. Thanks for watching.